Hey guys, welcome back to Tenta Outdoors. My name's Al Tenta. I'm one of the last 5 remaining on this season of Alone. Today's video I'm going to discuss episode 5. We're going to recap, talk about all the events that went down. Stick around. So this episode featured Alan, that's me, Mikey, Wyatt, and Cade. So the episode began with a quick shot of me constructing my gill net. Now they didn't go into too much detail about how I went about doing that, but basically I took all the inner strands of the paracord I brought. That was one of my 10 items, 80 meters of paracord. So I measured it all out. I took all the inner strands out. It was quite an arduous process, and especially because it got tangled on everything. Anything that it touches it gets tangled with. And I worked on it for about 2 hours a day over, I think, 3 days or so, maybe 4 days. But it made it seem like I made it in like half an hour. Not the case. I didn't want to spend too much time working on it every day because I wanted to spend all the time I could fishing. They didn't really show me launching my gill net because I forgot to hit record on the camera. But once I had it launched, I figured it out and I mentioned that, and they showed it on the show on episode 5 that I had forgotten to hit record. But anyways, the gill net was in the water and I was not having any success. I want to talk about that a little bit more. So the rules are, when you're making a gill net, there has to be 5 inches when you stretch the net from knot to knot in each mesh. So each mesh has to be 5 inches across. And I knew that going into the show, and I measured a section out on my Leatherman. So it was the length of my Leatherman itself, plus I made a reference, I can't remember where exactly it was, on one of my blades there was like a natural mark that measured exactly 5 inches. So I made every mesh 5 inches. And when I checked my gill net, when I took it out, it often smelled like fish. So I knew that fish were swimming through that and leaving some of their natural slime on the mesh itself, because man, it smelled just like pike slime. Now there were times in the morning where you could really feel that winter was coming. You could really feel the fall. And this whole episode was around 3 weeks in. I think the furthest they went was maybe day 23. And I alluded to feeling that fall had kind of touched my cheek or something to that effect, and I knew I had to make a door for my shelter because I didn't want to get stuck in there with 3 or 4 days of rain or snow or wind or whatever and not have a door. So they showed me constructing a door. It was kind of trial and error. It took me a few hours to make, but it's basically just sticks that I laid in my door first to get the size right. I wired it all together with snare wire. I chinked all the grooves first, then I laid a thick mat of moss over it and laid 3 or 4 sticks over top of that moss. Then I used a knot called a Canadian jam knot, which is a really handy knot. You can cinch it very, very tightly. And I had a stick on the bottom and a stick on the top, and I cinched down each end, so it kind of just squished everything together. And it worked really well. I was pretty happy how it worked. As I was making my door, there was a voiceover of an interview that was conducted either during the show or after the show. I can't really remember. But I talked about how the teachers that had an impact in my life, the teachers I remember, were the ones that showed an interest in my life and the ones I had a relationship with. And I kind of modeled my own teaching practices after my memories of high school and junior high about the teachers that I remembered and meant something to me, and that it was all based off a good relationship. I was trying to kind of emulate my philosophy after that. So the next scene in episode 5, they showed me fishing off my favorite fishing rock, doing hand lining, hand casting. I remember that night very, very well. That was my 4-fish night, and that was my best night fishing during the whole experience out there. And I was happy with the one, and I thought, you know what, the fish are biting. I caught a fish quite quickly. I'm going to put it in the shade and keep going. And I caught another one, kept fishing, caught another one, put that one in the shade. And I continued to fish till dark and ended up catching 4 decent-sized lake trout. And I was just ecstatic. I remember that night like it was yesterday, just the feeling of, man, this is like at least 8 to 10 days worth of food that I have ready to go. Super exciting night. And just watching that scene, it was emotional because it brought back all those feelings of excitement and just utter glee when you procure that much food so quickly. Not only is it great having all that food, but fishing is also a lot of fun. If you ever hand lined and you're catching these 3 to 5 pound lake trout on the hand line, man, it feels like there's somebody just pulling on the other line. It's just so raw. You can feel that fish through the line in your hands and just running up the rock and hand over hand, bringing that fish in. Very exciting way to fish. I really enjoyed it out there. So during my time fishing on that rock, they also put a note on the bottom of the screen that I had lost 34 pounds so far. Now that is a lot of weight. And there were some comments online, oh, Alan better start eating some food or he's going to be pulled due to lack of weight. An important note to remember is, at that moment, even 34 pounds down, I'm still heavier than my normal weight. Earlier in this program, I think it was episode 1, they said I gained 40 pounds. So I'm still not even down to my regular weight yet. I still had some fat on my gut. I think they showed me grabbing my gut. I can feel that my gut's getting smaller, and I can notice it in my face as well. Actually, even my shoulders, that my body is getting leaner and my face is getting thinner. So next up we have Cade. Cade starts out with this hilarious skit. Man, I gutted myself while I was watching this. He was an old, wise cowboy that had cans of berries. And there was a younger fellow trying to get berries off of him. And then he dressed up with he made glasses out of a rusty tin can and scammed another can of berries off this old cowboy. It was crazy, but it was hilarious. I really enjoyed it. After Cade picks some berries, he's sticking to his original plan of harvesting a big game animal, and he goes off to look for a bear. So after Cade picks some berries, he heads off to hunt a bear. He sets up a blind in some trees overlooking a trail where he knows the bear frequents, and he's kind of got the bear's area narrowed down to a smallish zone, and he's going to sit in this blind and wait for this bear for a shot. He also reminded viewers that he did not gain any weight for this competition, and he needs to harvest a big game animal. When you sit in a blind for that long, Cade talked about how it was tough mentally because he had a lot of time to think when you're just sitting quietly like that. On the way back from bear hunting, Cade spots a squirrel in the tree, makes an incredible shot with one of his homemade arrows, hits the squirrel, but the squirrel didn't fall out of the tree. After a couple of blueberries, Cade makes the decision to climb up the tree and retrieve the wounded animal. Now he understands that it's probably going to burn more calories than the squirrel can provide, but he didn't want to leave the squirrel in the tree to suffer, and that's a commendable thing. So he gets the squirrel, it bites him, he doesn't fall out of the tree luckily, and he manages to dispatch the squirrel while in the tree and climb down safely. So Cade made a really good decision washing out that squirrel bite wound really carefully because squirrels can transmit a disease called tularemia. So they show on the screen that Cade's now lost 10% of his body weight. So Cade makes a stew. It's got Labrador tea, pine needles, mushrooms, his squirrel, and he cuts up a bit of his belt and he puts it in there to eat as well in hopes of getting some oils, some fats, maybe a little bit of protein as well. He said the taste of that belt was not good, one of the most horrible things he's ever tasted. Then they put it on the screen that it's not recommended that you eat tanned leather. There could be some toxins and whatnot in it. That afternoon, Cade hits the berry patch again, not giving up hopes of harvesting a bear, and he admits he's getting really frustrated that this bear keeps giving him the slip, and he's in desperate need of some protein. He spots some fresh bear scat, but he still can't locate the bear. Cade then tells a spirit bear story, and I love that they named this episode after Cade's story about the spirit bear. Cade says he's feeling really weak and he's suffering from cold and hot flashes. He gets a late start, he's feeling tired, but he knows he needs to push through if he wants to keep going in this competition. As Cade is continuing to forage and hunt, he feels very dizzy, he's feeling sick, weak, and he ends up passing out for 57 minutes. I think when he comes to, Cade makes the realization that even though his spirit and his mind are still in this competition, he knows his body is giving out, and he makes the decision to tap out. Cade is the 5th person to tap out on this season. I think everyone will agree that Cade pushed himself so hard in this competition, and he's definitely a warrior and deserves a lot of respect for fighting through all the adversity that he did. Next up on the episode was Mikey. So they show Mikey stalking a grouse in his area, taking a few shots, but was unable to harvest the grouse. I practiced a lot with my bow before, but one mistake I made, I didn't practice shooting grouse up in a tree. I practiced mostly on the ground, and I'm telling you, I missed a lot of grouse as well. Mikey then spends some time reinforcing his shelter, getting it ready for the winter, reinforcing it with boughs, not only for protection from the snow, but also insulation. So Mike talks about how he spent quite a bit of time working on different shelter styles, whether it be a cabin, a teepee, but he ended up deciding on a lean-to shelter and just going with it. He admits that he had some difficulty kind of deciding what to do because, again, he's familiarizing himself with the environment. This whole surroundings in northern Saskatchewan is very different and quite new to him, and he's adjusting as he goes. On day 19, Mike gives himself a little pep talk, moving into positive thinking, says, I'm going to stop making errors, and I'm going to focus on getting some protein. Mikey talks about how his childhood has given him strength to move on in this competition. Mikey speaks to his son Nikolai on camera, pointing out the fresh snow. He talked about how his shelter is working well, it's insulated, and he's quite happy with it, but it's turned into a mouse amusement park, and he constructs a trap to try to reduce the population a little. So Mike makes a figure 4 deadfall trap and ends up catching a mouse in it. So Mike calls the mouse a rat, and there's been some comments online, that's not a rat. Guys, Mike was just calling it a rat as kind of a joke. Mike knows that wasn't a rat and it was a mouse. So Mike prepares the mouse, he skins it, roasts it over the fire, and he said even that little bit of protein does make him feel a bit better. So Mikey makes a hoop out of a piece of willow, and he stretches that little mouse hide out what appears to be a fishing line, and it looks beautiful. I mean, the spacing on it was perfect, and that's just a testament to Mike's skill as a craftsman, because that was a thing of beauty. I definitely couldn't do that and make it look that good. Nice job, Mikey. Next up on this episode was my Canadian friend, Wyatt. So the episode starts with Wyatt gathering some kindling for his fire and doing a pretty good little dance for the camera. He talks about his Hellfire lure and how it's producing for him quite nicely. So Wyatt definitely had a plan for big game hunting during his experience, but he's realized that he's going to focus all his attention on fishing, and he believes that's what's going to get him through to the end. He does some evening fishing and he reels in a beautiful lake trout. So after his first fish, Wyatt makes a good decision to keep fishing. And he hooks another fish, but unfortunately, it broke the line and stole his Hellfire lure. It was most likely a large pike that took his lure deep down in his throat, and pike have very sharp teeth, and it most likely cut Wyatt's line. So Wyatt's devastated. Not only did he lost his lure, but he also lost 2 treble hooks. Now I need to give Wyatt a shout out here. Him and I were discussing in orientation camp hooks, and we talked about, should we take treble hooks or should we just take single hooks? And because if you take 1 treble hook, that counts as 3 hooks in your total. You're allowed 25 hooks. So I decided against it. Now I credit Wyatt for deciding to take a bunch of treble hooks as well, because I ended up losing quite a few fish that I know I would have caught if I had decided to bring some treble hooks. Good decision on Wyatt's part. So again, Wyatt's positive attitude is displayed here. He doesn't get too upset. He just moves on and immediately starts making a new lure. This lure he names Gold Fury. He gives a little kiss and says, this lure has been made with love. So the second lure that Wyatt made, the Golden Fury, he made a longer steel leader to help prevent pike's teeth from cutting through his line. But unfortunately, he lost that lure too, probably to another large pike. So what I believe happened is the pike took that lure down very deep in his throat, and the wire leader might not have been quite long enough. And again, the teeth, I think, cut his line. Wyatt makes a comment to the camera about how this competition is a cakewalk compared to some of the things he's been through in his life. So Wyatt is now down to 1 smaller treble hook. If you are enjoying these videos, please consider subscribing to my channel for more content that'll be coming out shortly. Thanks for sticking around to the end of the video. Don't forget to tune in to Alone Episode 6, Season 10, next Thursday night. We'll see you next time.